Well, the writers went on strike weeks ago, and overnight, Hollywood actors officially went on strike. First picketing started today on the West Coast, I assume. SAG-AFTRA President Fran Drescher, yes, she was the TV sitcom star, starred in The Nanny, gave a very fiery press conference. She called the studios greedy and crazy. I'll start there with Jason Nathanson, ABC News Entertainment correspondent in Los Angeles. How far apart are the sides?
Really far apart, much further apart than we thought. That fiery speech from Fran Drescher really told us, gave us a lot of information we didn't have, because during the negotiations, both sides, the AMPTP, which is the studios, and the actors, SAG-AFTRA, they had agreed to a media blackout. We got a little bit of tidbits here and there, but from what we understood, things were kind of going okay. Fran Drescher even put a video a couple weeks ago saying, that they were talking and things were going along. Then they agreed to a contract or an extension on the deadline, which then made us believe that, well, maybe they're actually going to get things done, because why would they extend it if it weren't, close and they just needed to finish up a few things. But apparently during that deadline, or during that extension, the 12 days, Drescher said that they basically couldn't get the studios on the phone, that their calls were being denied and there were no talks were happening. And then she talked about how that they were treated terribly by the studios, and she couldn't believe that these people that she had worked for so long were treating them so poorly. Again, this is all her side. We haven't heard much from the AMPTP side about those exact things. But whatever the case, they are really far apart, and that means that this could go on a lot longer than I think some people were expecting.
So I was playing some of the excerpts of her speech for my audience a few minutes ago, and I was saying, well, any business model has to evolve, and the studios have the delivery system. They have the ability to get your artistry to the general public, but if they just won't talk and they say we have so much in the pipeline or so much backlog that we own already, they are in a much better position to just dig their heels in and wait out the writers and the actors and the rest of the artists.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, because the pipeline, eventually, all the content flowing through it runs out. And we've already seen that with the writer's strike, and we've seen it with the broadcast television schedules, who are going to, mostly for the fall, they're going to have, reality shows and game shows and things like that. Big Brother, which is a big summer show for CBS, would have been, a couple weeks to almost a month in. They're not starting that until August, because then they know it's going to run through September and maybe longer, and they'll have some content on the air for the 3 hours a night they have to fill. That's an issue there. Also, you have Disney, which is my parent company. They've already announced they're moving some of their big projects years, and this was because of the writer's strike. They didn't say it was because of the writer's strike, but it's clear that that's had some effect with, Avatar 5, I think, moving into 2030 at this point, which is not what they want, because Avatar 2 was a huge hit. It's made over $2 billion for them. They want to keep that gravy train rolling. They don't want to put those profits off. So there's an incentive on both sides to get back to the table, back to the negotiating table, but also to get back to work. This is going to hurt everybody financially, but it's on a practical basis. You're right. This is going to hurt and it already has hurt the writers and the actors, the ones that are struggling to pay the rent. Not the Fran Dreschers of the world, right, but the ones that are already struggling to pay their rent. Those are the ones who are going to be impacted the most.
Why did SAG-AFTRA, at least for the time being, exempt radio, TV, news, and talk?
That's always been the case. We're under a different contract. Same thing with the Writers Guild. In 2007, 2008, I was actually a Writers Guild news writer at a local station here in Los Angeles. We didn't have to strike. Those are always separate because they don't affect the same kinds of things. So news will never have to go on strike when it comes to things like that. Also, writers for different things. News writers also right now are not on strike, even though the writers are on strike. That can continue as well. They just decided to separate those because at the end of the day, those interests aren't really aligned, and those unions don't necessarily, or those parts of the unions don't need to necessarily support each other.
Fran Drescher, a lot of parody of her voice over the years. I played cuts of her from The Nanny here.
Sure.
And cuts from the network where the man's yelling, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore," next to her voice. I only know her from The Nanny. Did she have a wider career, a substantial career, other than just TV sitcom work?
Not really. I think that's most of what she did was The Nanny and other roles as well. There have been some movie roles, mostly comedy type stuff, the same similar-ish characters. But you don't have to. The president of SAG-AFTRA isn't about who's like the most popular actor, or the most accomplished actor. It's about who they think has goodwill in the industry, who can get things done, and who can negotiate and talk to the studios. I think before this, Gabrielle Cateris was the head of SAG-AFTRA. Most people might know her from Beverly Hills 90210, and not much else other than that. It's usually somebody who is a person who is semi-known in the industry, but not necessarily. It's not going to be your George Clooney's of the world.
Yeah. Well, wasn't Reagan Screen Actors Guild president?
That was back in 1960, yeah. And those were, I think, a little bit different times. Well, when it came to,
but that was if I'm not mistaken, he was Screen Actors Guild president before it merged with AFTRA.
Yeah, no, he was.
The union president. Let's just say he was the union president of the Actors Union back in the day, and that kind of launched him as well.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is that Fran Drescher will be president in a couple of years.
I've seen Stranger Things recently.
That is true.
Yeah,
that is very, very true.
How in our remaining moments, Mission Impossible. Dead Reckoning Part 1. Rachel, who our executive Bruce here, really wants to go see it this weekend. Your thoughts?
I really liked it. I think we talked about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and how the action on that was kind of boring and cliche. This was the action done right. This is what I wanted from Indiana Jones. The cast is all firing on all cylinders. Tom Cruise, again, reaffirms what a big kind of box office draw and star he is in doing these action movies as well and doing the stunts. His insistence on making things as real as possible and doing as much of it as he can, it really does pay off because the I don't want to give away the end of the movie, but there's a really big action sequence, of course, that ends the movie. That's not giving much away. Somewhat similar to an action sequence in Indiana Jones, but you compare the two side by side, and you're like, okay, this is the one done right, and this is the one that's just kind of going through the motions. The movie's funny. It's interesting. The plot's not too complicated, which I appreciate. A lot of these movies think that it's sophisticated to confuse the audience, basically, with some kind of plot that just
goes
is
backwards,
so
out of
hard
order
to understand. Yeah, no, they understand here. It's not about the plot, which is not necessarily a knock on the movie, but it's simple and straightforward. It's easy to understand, and then all the rest of it just makes way for the action.
Good guys and bad guys. Do you have to see it on the big screen?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is definitely one of those things I think is worth this one. Oppenheimer, which opens next week.
My daughter already bought tickets to that.
Yeah. Did she buy the Oppenheimer Barbie double feature tickets? Because a lot of people are doing that.
I don't think so.
That is actually a thing. So they open on the same day. A lot of people are doing both of the films on the same day. And I can't figure out which is the best order to see them in. Do you want to see the heavy Oppenheimer and then have Barbie as dessert? Or do you want to have kind of fun and then get into this really serious one afterwards? I don't know. I think, they'll leave that up to the people to decide.
Jason, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week, I'm sure.